There's a lot of threads to tie together here, Richard Haass. Let me start first with the fractured approach from the EU to Venezuela. What kind of a message does that send to the rest of the world that the EU is unable to agree on something that is so clear-cut for a lot of other nations?
Well, it's obviously a disappointment. There's been some movement, I think, in the right direction, which is to support the alternative to Mr. Maduro, the leader of the National Assembly. But it's also another statement about the EU, about how it underperforms and underachieves on the world stage. That said, let's be honest, it's not going to be critical. The real dynamic is going to be the hearts and minds of the Venezuelan security forces, and I think that's very much in play.
Yes, and even if we do get a regime change here, what's your outlook for how Venezuela recovers from here?
Oh, it's a long-term recovery because this has been a long-term deterioration in the country. You're talking really the stuff of years or decades, and it's going to take a massive infusion of regional and international help. And that's where the EU, by the way, might be more significant, would be to provide large-scale resources. You've got to bring back several million people. You've got to rebuild an oil industry. You've got to really rebuild a society in Venezuela. This ought to be an extraordinarily successful country. It's become anything but. So I think some of the raw material is there, but it's almost as if like an individual or a family that's been traumatized. It's been abused. So we're talking about a decade or a generation for Venezuela to get back.
We thank you for Shannon O'Neill on short notice in Davos. Shannon O'Neill came on and gave us wisdom with your CFR. Ambassador Haass, a lot of talk here about the Monroe Doctrine. Maybe it's a new Monroe Doctrine, Russia and China. Is the Monroe Doctrine in place?
Look, I think, to borrow a phrase from Barack Obama, we're leading from behind here, and that's the right way to lead. The United States is pushing things, but it's important that local countries stay out front. We're not talking...
Does President Trump agree with what you just said?
I think he's actually doing a pretty good job. I'm a frequent critic of this administration, as you know, but here, we're not talking seriously about military force. We're working with local countries. We're legitimizing...
Which country's key?
I'd say Colombia, Brazil. It'd be nice to get a little bit more European support.
Please. They're working on this?
Yeah, and again, the whole idea is to persuade the military to move away from supporting this guy. He's got Cuban support. He's got Russian and Chinese financial support. Again, the real question is the military. So can we basically incentivize them to move away? And that seems to me that requires two things. One, they can't worry about their own legal situation, and they've got to feel that the country has no future with Maduro and has a real future after Maduro.
We have to project here David Malpass listed to perhaps run the World Bank, nominated by the president. Does the World Bank project itself to help Venezuela, or is this an IMF task?
It's going to be very hard for either, just given the politics of both organizations. But once it's happened, if and when we reach a post-Maduro moment, then the politics fundamentally change. And I think both can and will help Venezuela at that point.
Are you optimistic on if? Are you optimistic?
More than I was, Tom. For so long, this thing was a logjam, and now it's broken. We actually feel Venezuela's in play. Yeah, it's dangerous still. And if what has been a largely peaceful confrontation becomes violent, almost like Hungary in '56 or something like that, this could still go. This could still head south. I don't know which way it's going to head. I don't think anybody does, but it's in play, and so at least it's broken the momentum of this slow race to the bottom.